The Buu Arc. Vegito, the Fusion Dance, Ultimate Gohan, Majin Vegeta, and Super Saiyan 3. This is an arc that is packed to bursting full of memorable moments from the series, introducing elements that are still being used today. However, when I went to my Twitter to ask the question, what is the worst Dragon Ball Z arc? The overwhelming majority claimed the Buu Arc. Now, that was specifically interesting because, in spite of it having the most numerous large set pieces and fan-favorite moments, it was still considered by the vast majority the weakest arc of the series. What do you guys on YouTube think? Cast your vote in the top right. I've noticed that nowadays people are scared to speak critically of Dragon Ball Z for the most part, with Super receiving the brunt of the criticism because there isn't a nostalgia associated with it. And this was made all too evident in the comment section under my poll on Twitter. So, today I want to shed some light on why the vast majority of those who voted had issues with the Buu section of the manga, to highlight fundamental flaws, and to take an honest, in-depth look at the final arc of Dragon Ball that was written and illustrated by its creator, Akira Toriyama. The most common complaint I've heard made at the expense of the Buu saga is that its runtime tends to feel excessively long. Typically in film, TV, or writing, this is primarily due to the structure of the story not pacing itself correctly. In other words, it's not satisfying the three-act structure. So, what's a three-act structure? In 1979, Sid Field published his book Screenplay, within which he managed to popularize the three-act structure now utilized in most Hollywood productions today. This divides the story into three sections, with two inciting incidents and a halfway turning point before the climax. As an example of how this structure works, I'll explain it with reference to one of the best paced arcs in Dragon Ball, the Frieza Arc. In Act 1, our main characters are established with a clear goal in mind: revive their friends with the Dragon Balls on Namek. They embark on their quest and arrive in time to witness Frieza and his men slaughter a small Namekian village. With remaining low and undetected being the initial plan of action, things quickly change as Gohan is compelled to give away his position to save a small Namekian child called Dende. This acts as the inciting incident and climax for Act 1. During this same act, Vegeta sets his own goal, arrives on Namek, and destroys a soldier within the forces he had been enlisted. Their old lives are now over. They are rebels working against the forces of Frieza. At this time too, Goku embarks on his own journey to rendezvous with the group with the goal of encountering Frieza specifically. Act 2 begins as all parties try to gain the upper hand through force and strategic means. However, at the halfway point, there is a turn of the tables with the arrival of the Ginyu Force. Due to this, Vegeta is forced to join the main cast of characters to combat this new threat. Ultimately overwhelmed, however, by the challenge, Goku arrives and makes the save. However, he was not ready, as he sustains considerable damage to his body. Now out of commission, Goku isn't able to help Gohan, Krillin, Piccolo, or Vegeta in combating Frieza. This leads nicely into the crisis of Act 2. Frieza being much more of a monster than any of them could have predicted, Goku arrives on the scene, unable to prevent the death of Vegeta. Goku is still not ready. Through intense battle and sheer determination alone, Goku manages to survive long enough against Frieza to charge a massive spirit bomb colliding with the tyrant. The climax of Act 2 comes as Krillin meets his death at the hands of Frieza, leading to Goku achieving a state of being thought to have been a myth, the first Super Saiyan in over 1,000 years. Goku is now ready. The climax of Act 3 sees Goku finish his fight with Frieza, followed by Planet Namek's destruction, ending in a bang. Frieza has been defeated, they have achieved their goal, everyone has returned to life, all is good once again. There is little to no wasted motion in this arc, with every instance serving as an important part of the story. One difference I did notice was the length of the first act of the Frieza arc. Typically around 25% of the story is set aside for such a section. However, since this is an ongoing series, characters and motivations didn't need to be established, which ultimately saved more time. Now, let's take a look at how the Buu saga is structured and compares. Act 1 begins as a tournament is brought to the forefront alongside the return of Goku and the rest of the main cast taking center stage. A short-term goal is established: prevent Majin Buu's release. There is an inciting incident that leads to Vegeta blowing up a stadium of people. Things have now changed and he cannot go back from this. The climax of the first act is the inevitable release of Majin Buu into the world. This is specifically different to the Frieza arc of Z in that the inciting incident takes place before the overarching goal of the story is established, to stop Majin Buu. The beginning of Act 2 sees Vegeta take responsibility for his actions with the heartfelt sacrifice as Goku is knocked out. His efforts are ineffective, however. Majin Buu persists. To buy time for a contingency plan, Goku reveals Super Saiyan 3 to Buu, but as a twist in the midpoint, he is forcefully taken away to the afterlife, leading to the inciting crisis and climax of the act. Buu kills everyone on Earth. Things are dire. Enter Act 3. Now fighting in the afterlife, Goku, Vegeta, and Hercule find themselves struggling against a pure evil Buu. Through tenacity and the clever use of the Dragon Balls, Buu is finally defeated and the world has returned to peace, with Goku and Vegeta too having been given their lives back. The most glaring difference between Namek's act structure and Buu's is found in its first act. What took Namek 17% of the story to provide a setup with a goal and inciting incident took Buu 40% of the overall runtime. You might have also noticed that in my breakdown of the Buu arc's act structure, I left out a considerable amount of fighting, events, and information. And this is my reasoning for what I think is, in my opinion, this arc's biggest flaw. The elements I omitted are not necessary to the story. To help us better explore this concept, let's first understand this quote from John Truby's screenwriting book, The Anatomy of Story. He writes, "Any character who is going to drive the story has to grab and hold the audience's attention at all times. There must be no dead time, no treading water, no padding in the story." In other words, the plot should move forward, incorporating no wasted motion, with each scene, piece of dialogue, and character servicing the arc's themes and narrative. For example, in Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, the film begins as we're introduced to Peter Quill. Too scared to take his mother's hand in her dying moments, he flees outside only to be abducted. The first act is spent introducing us to the supporting cast of characters and establishes the goal of the film, culminating in the final act achieving their goal through Peter facing his lifelong regret, learning how to share pain. What might have seemed like an arbitrary addition to the film at the beginning ultimately set the foundation for the most emotionally charged and cathartic moment of the story's climax. There was no wasted motion. Story beats happen for a reason, to serve a purpose. Even Peter's alias Star-Lord has significance, a nickname given to him by his mother, communicating to us, the viewer, that she meant so much to Peter, giving his character's goofy and lighthearted demeanor an emotional weight behind it. Now, that's not to say the Buu saga doesn't have emotional weight behind it. It most definitely does, and I will address that. But it also has more than a significant amount of unnecessary story beats that don't serve the story. Beats that, while fun, if removed, wouldn't have any noticeable consequences to the arc's conclusion. Gotenks, Ultimate Gohan's achievement and practice, Potara fusion, and really fusion in general, do not serve the narrative. Instead, act like their own mini-stories that pause the main story being told. I was amazed when looking back over this arc to find that a concept as unique and interesting and prolific as fusion didn't influence or play a role in the story's climax or narrative, really. If I was to remove it, or any of the other elements I just mentioned, the story makes just as much sense as it did with them. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that a common criticism made toward the Buu saga was its pacing and how it tends to drag. And this is primarily why. While these inclusions are awesome, the story very much stops to accommodate them, halting the forward progression of events. Take any substantial element away from the Frieza arc and it wouldn't work. You need Frieza's henchmen, you need the Dragon Balls, you need Vegeta, you need Guru, and you need the Super Saiyan transformation. Now, that said, would including Gohan's schooling, ultimate form, and the concept of fusion enrich the lore of the series and give characters that don't get screen time some exposure? Yes, but was their inclusion necessary for the story? No. Now, does that mean I don't want those elements in the story? No, I want them to be necessary to the story. And this can be achieved by making small changes to it. Have Videl and Gohan's relationship matter. Perhaps Buu kills her and Gohan couldn't stop it. He's then forced to contend with it being his fault that she's gone, to become stronger than ever and to avenge her. Even fusion could be integrated too. Vegeta's arc was about him coming to terms with what he really cares about, to lighten up. What if in order to defeat Buu at the end, he needed to do the fusion dance with Goku? Speaking of Vegeta, Vegeta is, without reservation, the best written character in this entire section by far. His arc begins almost immediately after he is introduced, and by its ending has reached its conclusion with almost no wasted motion. Much of the arc's feeling of suspense and tension comes as a result of the emotional weight Vegeta brought to the story, and once he sacrifices himself almost halfway through, the emotional resonance of the story doesn't come close to that until the ending, which again is thanks to Vegeta. On the flip side of that, the concept of Majin Buu was an interesting one in some respects. He is wildly different to any other villain Toriyama had made before him, and the idea of there being some internal conflict inside of Buu was interesting. However, he was plagued by some obvious issues, some of which are connected to specifically the design of his character. Majin Buu doesn't have much in the way of a character or personality. He reacts pretty much the exact same way to everyone. Thus, as a result, he needed Babidi to act as his mouthpiece, who was, in and of himself, a somewhat annoying character. However, I don't think that's necessarily the reason his character had issues, but more of a symptom of a much larger problem. And that problem being, Majin Buu assumes many different character designs and personalities throughout the arc. As a result, we aren't given enough time to connect to the character as well as we might want to. Frieza and Cell change throughout the show via transformation, but their personalities remain consistent, allowing us to identify them as the same character. If Majin Buu was just an evil force of nature, that is something that can be worked with. However, if during your story your main villain changes personality, demeanor, and outward appearance as regularly as Buu does, then you are faced with a real issue of villain hot potato, resulting in a climax with a villain in reality we just got introduced to, but one that also inherits all of the responsibility for the arc's horrors. If we look at the beginning of the story and put it next to its ending, you would think it's an entirely different story being told. And that's because it is, with none of the starting cast even present. I think this arc would have worked much more effectively if Majin Buu was a red herring and Vegeta was the twist villain of the arc, ending as he ultimately comes to his senses, realizing he was wrong, before making the save to undo the chaos he had wrought on the people he loved. This video has been, in no uncertain terms, the most challenging essay I've ever had to write, requiring me to revisit many of my books, rereading the manga, and talking to fans of the series on the topic. The story of the Buu saga is filled with some of the most heartwarming, awesome, and tragic moments in the series in isolation, but ultimately I think they are dragged down by the unorganized and incoherent nature of its narrative. I still enjoy the Buu saga, but in my view it is without question the weakest arc in the original series from a narrative structural point of view, despite having some of its most fun elements. Toriyama had a gift for illustration, composition, and whimsical storytelling. However, for whatever reason might have befallen his last hands-on addition to the series, whether it be circumstance, exhaustion, indifference, or any combination of the aforementioned, it's the unfortunate reality that the Buu saga could have been so much better and was, in some respects, a mishandled mess. Thanks for watching.